Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at something maybe a bit surprising today, a fear of fish.
Right, ichthyophobia.
Yeah, ichthyophobia. And look, it might sound a little strange, maybe even funny to some, but for the people experiencing it, it's very real, very impactful.
Absolutely.
So today on the deep dive, we're going to unpack this specific fear. We'll use the sources we've got to, understand it better, see the different ways it can show up.
And it made me find some surprising connections, too.
Exactly, because it's not always just, oh, I don't like to taste a fish. It can be this intense, kind of irrational fear.
Yeah,
We've got some psychological background here and also some historical, cultural context to try and get the full picture.
and it's interesting even just starting with the name, isn't it? Ichthyophobia
Right,
comes straight from Greek.
right.
Ichthys, that's fish, and phobos, well, that's fear. So fear of fish, simple as that.
Huh, simple word, maybe not a simple fear.
Well, exactly. And there's even a more specific one. Galeophobia, that's the fear of sharks, specifically. From galeos, another Greek word meaning small shark, apparently.
Huh, so you can get really specific with these things.
You really can. It's not just a blanket afraid of water stuff kind of thing.
And our psych source actually labels ichthyophobia as an unusual specific phobia.
Which makes sense, I suppose. It's
Yeah.
not like spiders or heights, which you hear
Right.
about all the time.
Right. But unusual doesn't mean less serious for the person who has it, obviously.
Not at all. And the source points out that even if it's unusual, the principles behind it, how it might develop, how you might treat it, they often overlap with other specific phobias.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, it's not one single thing. It exists on a spectrum. Could be cultural, just not eating fish, maybe not touching them.
Or it could be that really intense, irrational fear we mentioned, the kind that genuinely disrupts someone's life.
Exactly that distinction.
So how does a fear like this even start? We've got this really classic example from early psychology, behaviorism specifically.
Ah, John B. Watson.
That's the one, American psychologist.
Yeah.
And he talked about a case where an infant, a really young child, developed a conditioned fear of a goldfish.
Yeah, the goldfish in the bowl example is pretty famous in psych circles. Watson described how this baby, through some kind of learned association, the details aren't fully specified, but the learning part is key, developed this clear fear response, just seeing the goldfish.
Wow, a goldfish.
I know. And what's really interesting is what didn't work to fix it. Like showing the kid another child playing happily near the fish. Nope,
Didn't help.
didn't help. Even trying to shame the toddler for being scared.
Yeah.
Also completely ineffective.
Which really tells you something about how deep these conditioned fears can run, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They're not just logical decisions.
Not at all. They can be really resistant. So yeah, the takeaway isn't just about babies and fish. It's that these fears, even seemingly odd ones, can be learned responses.
Okay, but Watson didn't just leave it there, did he? He actually figured out a way to undo it.
He did, using a technique.
Mm.
Well, we'd now call it graduated exposure therapy, or systematic desensitization, kind of.
Right. So how did that work?
He started really small.
Yeah.
The child would be eating something pleasant, and the fish bowl, covered up, was placed way down at the other end of a long table.
So far enough away not to trigger the fear?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The idea was to pair the feared object, but at a very low intensity, with a positive experience eating. Keep the distress minimal or non-existent ideally.
Okay, makes sense.
Then what? Then very slowly, over days, they moved the bowl a little closer. Then a little closer still, but only if the child stayed calm and comfortable.
Ah, so the key is gradual, no big shocks.
Precisely. Eventually, they could get the bowl right up next to the child's food tray without any fear response. They even progressed further, using a smaller dish with water and a fish, moving that closer bit by bit too.
And the outcome?
Watson reported it was a success. The unconditioning, as he called it, was permanent. The fear was essentially extinguished through this careful, step-by-step process.
That's pretty amazing, actually. It shows these learned fears aren't necessarily forever. They can be unlearned.
Yeah, it really does. It offers a lot of hope, I think. And it makes you think about, smaller anxieties or aversions we all might have. Could some of them have similar, maybe less dramatic origins?
Yeah, definitely food for thought. Now, it's interesting you mentioned that gradual approach because our sources also touch on something, well, the opposite.
Oh, you mean radical exposure therapy?
Yeah, apparently there was a documentary back in 2007, The Panic Room. It showed someone with a really severe fish phobia being treated successfully using this much more intense direct exposure method.
Right, so flooding, essentially. Facing the fear head-on, often for a prolonged period.
Which just highlights, I guess, that there isn't a single right way to treat phobias, is there?
No, definitely not. What works can depend hugely on the person, the specific fear, how severe it is. Lots of factors. It's not one size fits all.
Good point. Okay, so we have the psychological angle, the conditioning, the treatment, but there's this whole other layer too, right? The cultural aspect.
Right. Yes. This is really fascinating. The sources mention the Navajo people. Historically, they were sometimes described as ichthyophobic
Because they avoided fish.
because they avoided fish, yeah. But here's the important part. Later on, this was reevaluated. It wasn't seen as a clinical phobia in the way we've been discussing Watson's infant, for example.
Ah, so what was it then?
It was understood more as a cultural or perhaps mythic avoidance of aquatic animals in general, not just fish, necessarily.
Okay, so like based on traditions or beliefs rather than individual fear conditioning?
Exactly. The thinking is it might have stemmed from, various things, maybe environmental factors in their traditional lands, maybe spiritual beliefs about water creatures, maybe just limited access or tradition around fish as food.
So it wasn't individuals having panic attacks about fish, it was a shared cultural practice or belief system leading to avoidance.
Precisely. A very different phenomenon from a specific phobia rooted in individual psychology. It really underscores how vital context is. You can't just slap a psychological label on a cultural practice.
Absolutely. What looks like fear on the surface could have completely different origins when you look closer at the culture.
Yeah. It shows our relationship with fish, or anything really, can be shaped by so many different things. There are individual minds, yes, but also these big shared cultural frameworks.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, speaking of fish and eating, that brings up another term mentioned, pescophobia.
Ah, yes. Coined by Jane Brody, the health columnist, from pesce, Latin for fish.
So another fish fear, or is this different?
It's different. Pescophobia, as she described it, isn't quite the irrational fear of the creature itself. It stems more from worries about eating fish.
Like health concerns.
Exactly. Concerns about contaminants, things like mercury, PCBs, that kind of stuff.
Ah, okay. So this isn't necessarily someone afraid of seeing a fish swim, but afraid of the potential health risks of consuming it.
Precisely. And our sources back this up. They mention research published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that specifically addressed these fears related to contaminants in fish. So it's a fear rooted in perceived and sometimes real health risks.
That feels very modern somehow, like a consequence of knowing so much or maybe too much about potential dangers in our food.
It does have that feel, doesn't it? It's less about an ancient instinct and more about navigating modern information about food safety.
We're constantly hearing about what's good for us, what's bad, potential risks. It can be overwhelming.
Absolutely. And it creates this tension, right, between maybe wanting the health benefits of something like fish, but also being wary of the potential downsides.
And it's interesting because the sources also mention the other side of that coin.
You mean the benefits outweighing the risks?
Yeah, there was a press release noted from the Harvard School of Public Health highlighting research suggesting that for many people, the nutritional upsides of eating fish often outweigh the potential risks from contaminants.
Right. Which just adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it? It's not just fear versus no fear. It's navigating conflicting information, risk assessment. It's complicated.
It really is. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We started with ichthyophobia, the fear of fish.
Which isn't just one thing. It can be that intense, specific phobia, even drilling down to galeophobia, the fear of sharks.
Right. And we saw how it can be learned, conditioned, like in Watson's goldfish example.
Yeah.
But also, importantly, how it can potentially be unlearned through methods like gradual exposure.
Then we contrasted that with cultural avoidance, like the Navajo example, which looks similar on the surface but has totally different roots, more about shared beliefs or practices, not individual clinical phobia.
Yeah, a really crucial distinction.
And finally, we touched on pescophobia, the fear tied specifically to eating fish, often driven by very real contemporary concerns about health and contaminants.
So quite a range of ways humans can end up being fearful or avoidant when it comes to fish.
Definitely. And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it, for you listening? In this age of constant information, constant news cycles about food safety, health warnings, recalls, how much does that influence our own anxieties?
Good question.
Even if it doesn't become a full-blown phobia, like ichthyophobia or pescophobia, could this nonstop stream of information, sometimes contradictory information, subtly shape what we feel comfortable eating, what we avoid?
It probably does, more than we realize sometimes. It makes you think about how we navigate risk and information overload.
Exactly. So what started as looking at a seemingly niche phobia, fear of fish,
Yeah.
it actually opens up these much broader questions about fear itself, how
Hmm.
it's learned, the power of culture, and how we grapple with health anxieties in the modern world.
Absolutely. Hopefully, this deep dive gave you some new perspectives on ichthyophobia and maybe even got you thinking a bit about your own relationship with things that feel unfamiliar or maybe even a little concerning out there in the world.